I never thought a cabin in the woods could feel more like a prison than a home, but that's exactly what it became. I should have turned back the day I saw it, sitting in the clearing, silent and strange, its dark wooden walls weathered and scarred as though the forest itself had been fighting to reclaim it. But I didn't. Something about it pulled me closer, like an invitation I couldn't refuse. Or maybe a trap laid perfectly for a man desperate to escape the noise of his old life. I'd been looking for quiet. My life back in the city had been falling apart. My job was gone, my friends had drifted away, and I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my own failures. So, when I found the listing for the cabin online, remote, self-sufficient, perfect for writers and seekers of solitude, I convinced myself it was exactly what I needed. A new beginning, a chance to breathe. The road leading up to it was rough, more like a trail than anything meant for cars. My truck's tires groaned and scraped against rocks, the branches overhead clawing at the windows like hands trying to pull me back. By the time I reached the clearing, my heart was already uneasy. It wasn't fear, not yet, just the kind of dread you feel before a storm. The cabin itself looked older than the photos had suggested. Its roof sagged slightly, and the wood carried an almost black stain from years of rain and rot. The windows were small, the glass warped as though it had been melted by heat or time, and the forest pressed close. So close that it felt like the trees were leaning in to watch me. But when I stepped inside, I told myself it was enough. There was a fireplace, a small kitchen, and a loft where a bed waited under a slanted ceiling. It smelled of pine, dust, and something faintly metallic, something I didn't want to identify. I unpacked my things, lit a fire, and told myself I would get used to it. That's what people do when they're starting over, they adjust. The first night was uneventful, though the silence was unlike anything I'd ever known. No cars, no hum of electricity, not even crickets. Just the wind against the cabin walls and the occasional creak of wood shifting under its own weight. I lay awake for hours, listening, certain that at any moment I'd hear footsteps outside. It was on the second day that I realized living here would be harder than I thought. The well behind the cabin was nearly dry, its water murky and bitter. The generator sputtered and died after just a few hours of use, and the forest seemed wrong. I tried chopping wood, but every tree I touched felt alive, vibrating faintly under my hand, as though it resented the idea of being cut down. When I finally struck one with my axe, the sound that came back wasn't the hollow thud of wood, it was deeper, almost like a groan. I laughed it off, telling myself I was just jumpy. But that night, when I sat by the fire, I heard something outside. Not the wind, not an animal. It was a voice, low, whispering, carrying words I couldn't understand. I froze, every muscle tight, my ears straining. It came from the trees, circling, moving closer, and then silence, so sharp it rang in my skull. When I opened the cabin door to look, nothing was there, just the dark forest, endless and watching. But when I turned back inside, I noticed something I swear hadn't been there before. A muddy handprint, smeared across the window. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to be the escape I had imagined. This was going to be a test, a fight, maybe even a punishment. The muddy handprint on the window stayed with me the rest of that night. I tried to convince myself I had left it there somehow, though I knew I hadn't touched the glass. Still, I needed to believe it was nothing. People do strange things to themselves when they're isolated. The mind plays tricks, invents shadows where there are none. That's what I told myself as I forced down some canned beans and crawled into bed. But the dreams that came were worse than any waking fear. I dreamed of the forest moving, the trees bending and twisting as if they were alive, Faces bulged from the bark, screaming without sound. Hands clawed at the cabin's walls, pulling, tearing. I woke in the dark with my chest heaving, certain someone had just been leaning over me. My hand fumbled for the lantern. Nothing. Just the cabin, still and quiet. But the sheets were damp with sweat, and the smell of earth filled the air as though the forest had followed me inside. By the third day, living in the cabin had become less about writing, less about escape, and more about survival. The food I brought was limited. I thought I could supplement it with what the land offered, but the forest didn't want to give me anything. Traps I set came back empty. The one time I thought I caught a rabbit, I found the snare snapped clean in half, like something far larger had crushed it. Even fishing was impossible. The lake at the edge of the woods was still and black, with nothing breaking its surface except the occasional ripple, as if something large moved beneath. I couldn't even bring myself to step into its waters. The nights were the worst. The whispering returned, clearer each time. It wasn't just noise, it was words, fragments of sentences I almost understood. Sometimes it called my name, sometimes it laughed, low and cruel. Other times it begged, pleading with me to let it in. I refused to open the door again, but that didn't stop it from trying. On the fourth night, the handle of the cabin door rattled. Not once, not twice. Repeatedly, as though someone stood outside, testing my resolve. My heart thumped so hard I thought it would burst. I sat in the corner, clutching my axe, too afraid to move, until the sound finally stopped. When daylight came, I found tracks outside. Bare feet, small, child-sized. They circled the cabin in loops and spirals, pressed deep into the mud as though whatever had left them had been walking there for hours. I started to think about leaving, just packing what little I had left and driving back to civilization. But the problem was, the road I came in on didn't look the same. I tried it once, heading out in the truck, determined to escape. The trail seemed familiar at first, then twisted into something else. No matter how far I drove, I always ended up back at the cabin clearing, the truck tires crunching against the same stones I thought I'd left behind. After the third attempt, I shut off the engine and sat behind the wheel, my hands shaking. I wasn't trapped by accident. The forest didn't want me to leave. The cabin itself began to change. I know how insane that sounds, but it's the truth. The walls creaked constantly now, even without wind. Doors stuck that once opened easily. The floorboards shifted, sometimes bulging up as though something pushed from underneath. One morning, I found carvings on the wood near the fireplace. Symbols, circles, jagged lines. Marks that burned my eyes to look at for too long. I tried to sand them out with a knife, but they always came back by nightfall, darker and deeper. And then came the sound of breathing. Not mine, not the wind. Heavy, ragged breaths that filled the cabin after the fire died, as if someone stood just behind me in the dark. I spun around a dozen times, lantern raised, but there was never anyone there. Still, I could feel it warm, damp air brushing the back of my neck, as real as any living thing by the end of the first week. I wasn't sleeping. My face in the mirror grew gaunt, my eyes red-rimmed and hollow. The forest pressed closer every day, the trees leaning so far in they nearly scraped the roof. And the whispers, they weren't just outside anymore. They were inside, low and constant, buzzing in the back of my skull. Sometimes they told me to hurt myself. Sometimes they told me I'd never leave alive. The breaking point came on the 8th night. I woke to the sound of footsteps inside the cabin. Not outside, inside. Soft, deliberate, pacing across the floorboards. My body locked in place, every nerve screaming. I forced myself to sit up, lantern in hand, and shone it toward the sound. The beam caught something. For half a second, I saw it. A figure, small, childlike, standing in the corner of the room. Its skin was gray, stretched too tight over its bones, and its eyes were black, bottomless pits that swallowed the light. I dropped the lantern. By the time I scrambled to pick it up again, the figure was gone, but the footprints weren't. Muddy, wet, pressed deep into the wooden floor, leading from the door to the corner where I had seen it, and then to the side of my bed. I don't think I've known true fear until that night. The footprints beside my bed nearly broke me. I sat frozen for hours, too terrified to close my eyes again, too afraid to move. My lantern burned low, the flame flickering like it might die at any moment. And in that dim light, I realized something that chilled me worse than anything I'd seen so far. The footprints weren't leaving. They ended right there, at the edge of the bed, as if the thing was still standing there, invisible, watching me. I couldn't stay. I had to get out, even if the forest looped me back 1,000 times. So at first light, I packed what I could and ran. Not drove, ran. My truck hadn't started since the night before. The keys turned, the engine coughed, but the sound was wrong. Like something alive lived inside the hood, rattling, breathing with each churn. I abandoned it without a second thought. The forest swallowed me whole as I pushed through the undergrowth. I didn't follow a trail. I didn't care where I went. I just needed to move. Every snapping twig behind me sent jolts of panic through my veins. At one point, I looked back and saw a figure through the trees, too far to see clearly but close enough that I knew it was following. Small, pale, and still, watching. Hours passed, maybe days. Time in that forest didn't feel real anymore. I stumbled across the same rock, the same twisted tree, the same black pool of water again and again. The forest bent itself like a maze, circling me back no matter which direction I took. By dusk, I found myself right where I started staring at the cabin's crooked roof through the trees. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat at the table, knife in hand, lantern light shaking. Every so often, I heard scratching on the outside walls. Slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. Sometimes it stopped, and that was worse, because then I could hear breathing through the cracks, like whatever it was had pressed its face against the wood, trying to smell me through it. I snapped sometime before dawn. My mind couldn't take it anymore. I screamed into the empty air, demanding answers. "What do you want from me?" My voice cracked, raw from days of silence. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the whispering began again, but this time, louder. And it was inside. Not outside the cabin, not behind the walls. Inside my skull, 100 voices, all speaking at once, like the walls of the cabin themselves were alive and pouring their secrets into me. They told me I didn't find the cabin. It found me. They told me it wasn't just wood and nails, it was alive, a parasite, feeding on whoever entered. It had taken others before me, pulling them into its roots, into its soil, binding them to this place forever. And now, it wanted me. That's when I noticed the floorboards moving again, but this time, they didn't stop. They rose and fell like something underneath was breathing. A crack split open in the center of the floor, and the smell that came out was unbearable damp earth, rot, and death. I backed against the wall, knife clutched tight, as something pale and skeletal began to push through the gap. It was a hand, small, childlike, fingers black with soil, nails broken. Another hand followed, then a head. A child dragged itself from the hole. Gray skin stretched over its bones, empty black eyes fixed on me. Behind it, more hands clawed their way up. Dozens of them. Too many. All children. All dead. All whispering in unison, their voices filling my skull until I thought I would burst. I stumbled for the door. My hand hit the latch. It wouldn't open. I slammed my shoulder into it, once, twice, again. The wood groaned but didn't give. Behind me, the children were crawling free, their mouths open in silent screams, their bodies contorting as they pulled themselves closer. Their whispers grew deafening. With one final heave, the door cracked open, and I threw myself into the night. I ran. I didn't stop to look back. The forest tore at me, branches clawing my face and arms, roots snagging my legs, but I kept going. Somehow, impossibly, I made it to the lake. The surface rippled black, the water reflecting the moon like an endless void. I thought maybe I could swim across, escape whatever trap held me here. But as I reached the edge, I froze. The water was full of faces, dozens, maybe hundreds, pale, childlike, their eyes wide and empty, staring up at me from beneath the surface. They moved with the water, their mouths opening in unison, releasing bubbles that never seemed to reach the surface. I screamed and stumbled back, tripping over a root. When I looked again, the faces were gone. Just water. Black, endless water. I don't remember how I got back to the cabin, only that I did. It stood there waiting for me, door wide open now like it knew I'd return. And I did. Because where else could I go? That was 3 days ago, or maybe 3 weeks. Time doesn't exist here anymore. I've stopped trying to leave. The cabin doesn't let you. The forest doesn't let you. Even if you run, you always come back. Always. I hear the whispers now all the time. Even in daylight. They don't beg or mock anymore. They teach. They show me what the cabin really is. Roots, stretching deep into the earth, pulsing with the hunger of centuries, feeding on anyone foolish enough to step inside. The children weren't victims. They were the cabin. And soon, I will be too. The floorboards are rising again. The crack is wider. The hands are reaching. I don't have the strength to fight anymore. Maybe I never did. The cabin called me here, just like it called the others. And now I finally understand what the voices meant. You don't live in the cabin. The cabin lives in you.